Assalamualaikum, I'm Syafzan Johari and this is Agenda AWANI. Tonight we'll be talking about the Qatar diplomatic crisis. Just a little bit of background here. The crisis began when several countries abruptly cut off diplomatic ties with Qatar in June 2017. And these countries included Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain and Egypt. And the severing of relations, including withdrawing ambassadors and imposing travel and trade bans. So to talk more about this, we have here tonight Professor Dr. Abdul Al-Fattah Al-Awisi. He's the visiting professor of the University Utara Malaysia. Welcome to the studio, Professor.
I'm glad to be back here.
Again, yes. This is the second time interviewing you.
Yes.
Yes, and today we'll be talking about the diplomatic rift, Saudi and Qatar diplomatic rift, and it's entering its fourth month now.
Yes.
And it's still ongoing.
It is still ongoing.
And there's no seems to end. Unfortunately,
yeah. Maybe to understand this, we need to look at the wider picture and to look at the main actors in the region, because these are sort of regional actors and local actors, but we need to look at the wider crisis happening in the Middle East since 7 years ago, 2010, and this is part of the crisis in the Middle East. Unfortunately, or fortunately, the major actor on this local crisis in the Gulf is the Americans. The Americans, they are a friend with both conflicting parties. They are close friends to the Qatari, but in the same time they are close friends to the Saudis, to the Emiratis, to the Bahrainis and to the Egyptian. And that's where the shock came with the news. For example, Qatar is hosting the biggest American military base in Doha. In Saudi Arabia there is the same, in United Arab Emirates is the same, the Gulf, the Bahrain is the same. This is where the shocking coming. In particular, after the American President Trump, he met with most Arab and Muslim leaders, including all the Gulf, and they were in Riyadh. They were talking about fighting terrorism and all aspects of fighting terrorism, and no one was expecting this coming. And out of sudden, a few days after the summit in Riyadh, this has happened. It affecting, seriously, if we look at it, affecting the social life, the economical life, and even the education. Because maybe for audience in Malaysia here to understand that the culture there, this is the Bedouin culture, the tribal culture. And within the tribal, for example, who's ruling in Qatar is a tribe, who's ruling in Saudi Arabia is a tribe, who's ruling in United Arab Emirates, a tribe. This is part of the tribal state which has been developed there during the British colony over there. Even when I looked at some documentation, they are calling this Gulf under protection.
And when we study and when we understand the Islamic history, and then the chapter where the Arab in history, we also understand that the tribes, they always clash between tribes.
That's normal within the Arabs. Maybe for someone who is not aware of this tribal system, they look and they have been shocked. Oh, what is going on?
And this is another tribal clash.
Exactly, but it's in a tribe which has been developed into a state. And now people are shocked. But within Arab history, that is, that is the norms.
All right.
It's like look at the individual. We are friends, and sometimes we have a clash of interest. The same with the tribes. The same with a state here, based on tribal tribal system. So maybe this is one way of understanding what is happening. Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain, they looking at Qatar is having a different agenda compared with, although they are part of the Gulf GCC Council, but they are looking at Qatar like having a different agenda. They have Al Jazeera, and Al Jazeera is making a headache, especially after the Arab Spring. Al Jazeera is voicing a lot of sentiment which they felt the Saudis uncomfortable with Al Jazeera and what they are broadcasting, bringing the opinion and the opposite opinion at the same time.
When we talk about Al Jazeera and media, they are very progressive.
They are.
And of course, you know, if you understand, there are certain fabric of the Arab way of doing things, or for instance, it's just up until recently, the Saudi Arabia allows women to drive.
Yes.
So that's how the thinking of the kind of thinking that they have there. So maybe they couldn't accept the progressiveness.
Yeah, well, it's we need to understand the Arab region for 100 years. By the way, yesterday was 100 years of Balfour Declaration, which is the mother of all problems in the Middle East. So the Arabs, they have been living for 100 years or more or less in a difficult position where they are independent, but at the same time they are not independent. I like the expression of an American professor. He's now 86, called Professor Richard Falk. I was attending with him a conference in Istanbul a month ago, and he was talking about decolonization of the mind in the Muslim countries. Decolonization of the minds in the Muslim country. And he said this is one of the major problem. It's not the military decolonization. It is decolonization the mind, because the mind has been in the region, in the Middle East in particular, has been under colonization. People there serving the Western interest rather than serving the local and the regional interest of the people at that region. Still, when you know progressive agents such as independent media comes in, and they couldn't absorb that, but it's part of being West. Well, Al Jazeera. If we need to dig further, this was part of the American deal with Qatar at some point, because they would like during Clinton, what they called democratization of the Middle East. So part of that, there was a deal, because there was a coup in Qatar, and I don't mean a military coup here, but it's within the family, and they felt one way is we need a voice of the people. They don't have a voice, but it seems from the Saudi point of view, Al Jazeera went too far of progressing and representing the opinion of the Arabs outside.
Progressive opinion was not part of the things that was being blamed, but it was quoted as supporting terrorism.
Yes.
Those are the things. So clearly on the paper, it was never mentioned. Being progressive is part of the reason why. So I have to take our first short break, and when we come back, we'll talk more about this. Don't go away. Welcome back to Agenda Awani. We're still with Professor Dr. Abdul Fattah Al-Fattah at LYC. He's the visiting professor of the University of Utara Malaysia. And we'll talk about, prior to the break, we're talking about decolonizing
Yes.
the Arab's mind, and about we know the reason was not the reason given for the blockade. So,
well, I think the main issue for the American administration is fighting terrorism. This has been the agenda of the Americans since the 11th of September in America, occupying Afghanistan, and then coming to Iraq, and now what is happening in Syria. So their main top priority is, and this was very obvious with the new Americans, President Trump, is to fight terrorism. And the meeting in Riyadh was on that issue. So the Saudis, they are accusing the Qatari. They have, number one, a close relationship with Iran, and there is a big issue between Saudi Arabia and Iran, between United Arab Emirates and Iran, because Iran occupying 3 islands from United Arab Emirates. This is for a long time, and they are saying that Qatar is hosting a terrorist organization, and also funding a terrorist organization. Maybe here, going back, for example, they are saying they are hosting Hamas in Qatar, and the headquarters of Hamas, after they moved, after the Arab Spring in Syria, the leadership of Hamas moved from Damascus into Doha. But very interestingly, about a few months ago, after this crisis, the former CIA chairman, he came and he said, we requested Qatar to host Hamas in Doha and Taliban. So this is where the dilemma. They are accusing hosting Hamas in Doha.
but they were requested.
But they have been requested to host Hamas and Taliban over there. And this is not the first time Qatar is moving with the American request. I recall when just read this statement from the former chairman of the CIA, that participating in the election, in the Palestinian election in 2006, the Emir, the current Emir of Qatar, he came publicly and he said the American requested us to convince Hamas leader to participate in the Palestinian election, and we have convinced them to participate. So basically, Qatar is saying, we have a good relationship with Hamas, but this is on a request of the Americans. And the Saudis, on the other hand, they are saying, no, this should not happen. And this is maybe help to understand. For example, there is an issue between Saudi Arabia and Iran. But it seems to me, as an observer here, that they are pushing different parts, including Hamas and other countries like Qatar, to have a more closer relationship with the Iran. For example, before Trump came in the summit in Riyadh, the Americans requested 6 Hamas leaders to leave Doha. They asked them to leave. Turkey cannot host them. Some of them, they came here to Kuala Lumpur. And the Israeli media immediately said Malaysia is hosting Hamas. And then a governmental spokesman came and he said, no, our country is open to all our Muslim brothers. They can come as a visitors, but we don't host organization here. We have a balanced relationship between Fatah and Hamas, and we deal with all these aspects. So the only country can take them, Lebanon, and Hezbollah welcomed them, and now they are host of Hezbollah. So basically, this policy of
trying to push them,
instead of hosting them in a country which is having a good relationship with the American, to go to push them to a country where the American have an issue with Iran, in particular Trump. And from my own sources, the Qatari foreign minister, he told the American ambassador in Doha, by doing this, you are pushing this organization, Hamas, to be more close with Iran. And that's what happened. That's what happened. They are being hosted by Hezbollah. And after being hosted by Hezbollah, now they made an official visit to Tehran, and they reconnect. Because there was a big shift.
We're talking about Hamas now.
Yes, there was a big shift between Hamas and the Iranian regime as a result of what's happening in Syria. But as a result of this crisis, and unfortunately, the winner of this crisis, the greatest winner of this crisis is Iran.
All right. And recently, Hamas and Fatah had sat down and started to negotiate. Would this impact, or would this give somehow rather?
Well, this is part of the wider crisis, because they have been forced by the Egyptian intelligence. It seems there is something coming for the Middle East, for the whole region. And one of the main issues, they need to resolve the Palestinian question. The Palestinian question, as the former British Prime Minister Tony Blair, he said, it's the mother of all problem in the Middle East. So it seems they are trying to convince all parties, Hamas, Fatah, other Palestinians group, that's its time now. You need to come together. There should be the Palestinian one voice. And this has been done by the Egyptian intelligence with a clear instruction from Abdel Fattah al-Sisi in Egypt. And they hosted them where the negotiation happened? In the headquarters of the Egyptian mukhabarat, in intelligence. And they said to him, you don't leave here until you come to an agreement.
And it went fruitful.
It was. And accordingly, this is why, what I mean, we need to look at the Gulf crisis as part of a wider crisis, which is will affect the whole region. People are talking of the century deal. This is what the Egyptian is saying. This is what the American is saying. It seems for me, I think the region is moving to a crisis, a major crisis, which can maybe a war. So if I'm trying to be a realist here, wearing that hat, I think the region is moving
towards war.
All
right, we have to take another short break, and we'll be talking more about the possibility of another Gulf war, but this might be a different Gulf war as what we've seen before. This is a rift between Gulf countries, and looks like the GCC is becoming irrelevant. We'll talk more about that. Stay tuned. See you back for this. Welcome back to Agenda AWANI. We're still with Professor Dr. Abdul Fattah LLYC. He's a visiting professor of the University Utara Malaysia. And before we leave for the break, I mentioned something about GCC.
Yes.
And how it has become irrelevant, yes, because they've met after the meeting, or after GCC after 2 days GCC meeting, and suddenly this erupt. So obviously something is not right there.
Well, it's the King of Bahrain just recently, a few days ago. Before him, it was his foreign secretary. They said, we can't, because they're supposed a meeting in Kuwait, and Kuwait is the one mediating between the two countries. They said, we can't go to this meeting if Qatar will be there. So they are asking to frozen Qatar membership in that council. If it's happened, this is showing there is a serious crisis in the region. The American cannot solve it, but it seems the Americans are benefiting, by the way, from both sides here. There is a lot of deals happening in public and in...
Because if there's war, then of course who's going to be the most benefiting?
Well, according to the Emir of Kuwait, and he said that after he met Trump recently in September, he said the first few days of the crisis, there was a possibility of a military intervention into Qatar, basically taking over Qatar by the Saudis and the Emiratis with the help of the Egyptian.
Okay.
With the recent interview of the Emir to the Emir of Qatar to the GCC, he's not excluding that. But the difficulty, the Iranians is there, the Turkish is there. I'm talking militarily. After the crisis happened, the president of Turkey called the parliament to approve a memorandum of agreement between the two countries, so that he can deploy Turkish soldiers over there. It was very quick. The parliament approved it, the president signed it, and then the next day there was Turkish troop in Qatar, and there is already, because you cross the water, Iran, you cross the water, you are in Qatar over there. So that is, in one hand, making it unlikely that there might be a possibility of a war. But if America and if Trump would like to use this as a pretext regarding the war with Iran, because he's talking about the agreement with Iran and they are not implementing the agreement, and there is a possibility going to the Congress to get approval of war, etc., etc., that will be a different scenario of war in the Gulf region.
Right. In a very short answer, how do you resolve this? How would the Gulf region resolve this?
Unfortunately, the Gulf region, the one who tried to mediate, and he's in a position of mediating, is the Emir of Kuwait. But until now, it seems no progress. He is the man with his wisdom and with his long experience in politics. He can do that, but it seems no one is willing to move. Even the Americans, he said he would like to call them in a meeting in America. So possibility of war, there is that possibility. But this will not be a normal Gulf war. This will not be between Qatar and the Saudis and the Emiratis. I think this will be a major war to reshape the whole of the Middle East rather than of the Gulf region.
And also run by proxies.
Unfortunately.
All right. Thank you very much, Professor Dr. Abdul Fattah LOIC, a visiting professor to the University of Utara Malaysia. We talk about the Qatar and Saudi diplomatic rift, and you might be affected by it if you're flying Qatar Airways, maybe, or there are many other way of you might got involved in that. Economically maybe, or socially. Share your experience with us in our social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter or Instagram. Until then, I'm Chef Zan Johari. Thank you for watching.